Welcome back to the lecture series in animal physiology. So, today we will be starting with the endocrine system, which we are into the 12th week. So, we have 5 more classes, we will have a couple of additional modules. So, endocrine system. So, there are systems where cells interact with other cells by different modes. So, one of the easiest mode is the nervous system, where a cell secrete certain neurotransmitter, the other cell react to it. Those are very short distance. Then there are situations when one cell secretes and the surrounding cells, multiple cells get affected in a vicinity, which is paracrine mode. Yet there is another mode which is called endocrine mode. Endocrine mode is situation where effector cell or the one which is causing the effect is sitting at a distance and send a signal to another cell which is far away from there. It is almost like a long distance transmission. That is what endocrine system is all about. And as a matter of fact, the body could be classified into 3 control systems: nervous system, immune system, endocrine systems. And they continuously crosstalk with each other to achieve any kind of physiological aspect. So, one of the things, the way I wanted to introduce this chapter is some of the gory tales of sports where endocrine molecules have been used in as a dopant. So, to start off with the first slide, if you see, there are some of the very important personalities: cyclist, 100-meter sprinter Ben Johnson, Wai Xuan, one of the swimmers, so likewise and so on and so forth. And all these people, they made tremendous contribution in sports, yet they will be known for drug abuse. They used performance enhancing drugs. An interesting part of this performance enhancing drugs are most of these drugs. Say for example, here if you could read, it is written EPO. This EPO, our EPO is erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is a molecule which helps in increasing the number of red blood cells. In other words, you are actually enhancing your oxygen carrying capacity, and if your oxygen carrying capacity increases, automatically your performance will increase. Of course, once we will talk about the blood in coming lectures, we will talk about how that affects the rheology of the blood or the flow dynamics of the blood. Okay. So, if you look at Tour de France, which is a cycling competition, one of the very toughest cycling competition, which is crawls through the Alps, so wonderful landscape. And if you see the way the speed has changed after 2005, if you look at it, there is always a continuous speed increase among the performers. We really do not know that much of these speed increase is just by sheer practice or some kind of performance enhancing drugs were used. But after this peak, you see there are falls which has happened, and which is a significant amount of fall if you really measure this fall which is happening from the peak. So, there are several such events where in sports these kind of drug abuse have been rampant. So, the doping dilemma, game theory helps to explain the pervasive abuse of drugs in cycling, baseball and other sports. Okay. So, we will not get into that, but what is important is some of the drugs. Say for example, I talked to you about erythropoietin, then transfusion of blood by blood related blood doping. Then you have these wonderful compound called anabolic steroids, androstenedione, testosterone, winstrol is the name of analog of this. Then you have the beta agonist, Then you have human growth factor, anti-steroidogenic factor, tamoxifen, okay, which is also used in cancer, liver diseases and blood clots. So, what is important to realize that it is not only that the drug is coming when you are like you are exclusively taking it to enhance your performance. You may be under treatment of a certain drug and that drug may enhance your performance. So, keep that in mind. It is not that you have planned it. It may happen absolutely by an accident, and most of these drugs or almost all of them have something to do with endocrine system, and that is the reason why I am kind of started with it. Then you have all these weight control diuretics, okay. Then you have diuretics diluting the urine. Then you have amphetamine, epinephrine. Then you have these beta blockers, narcotics, morphine, oxycodone, and series of them. And the common side effects here. Please read through these common side effects. So, now we will enter into the endocrine system, which is, as I mentioned, long distance signal transfer. So, among the long distance signal transfer, these are the major endocrine organs what we have: hypothalamus, pituitary, which is deep inside the brain underneath hippocampus. Please do not confuse it with hippocampus. Your pineal, which ensures your day, so circadian rhythm, which is handled by pineal. Thyroid, a very important one, in depth we will discuss. Parathyroid, again this is common. Adrenal, just on top of the kidney you have, although you haven't covered the kidney yet, but soon we will cover it. Then you have the pancreas. Then you have the ovaries, which is unique to the females, uterus, which is unique to the female, and the testes, which is unique to the male. Okay. So, these are the different, this is a chart which I prepared for you people, so that you have an idea about all the. So, you have this hypothalamus out here, which is involved in secretion of growth hormone releasing hormone, corticotrophin release, this is the master gland, thyroid releasing hormone, and these are all releasing hormone they are secreting. Okay. So, this is a multi-step process. The first one say will send a signal to second one, you release this, then this one will release, then this one will be traveled to another part where it will act. Simultaneously there are reverse route. So, the one which is releasing will send a signal, please stop releasing, then the master organ will tell, okay, I am sending you a signal called secretion inhibiting signal. So, it is kind of a very feedback loop which works. Then you have gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH, antidiuretic hormone, ADH, oxytocin, which is exclusively happens in the female body, which induces labor pain during childbirth and the release of milk. Okay. Then you have the second major system, which is anterior pituitary. So, anterior pituitary, so there are two, hypothalamus is connected to anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary. So, the anterior pituitary is involved in growth hormones. It is a growth hormone releasing hormone, there is a one-to-one correlation here. Okay. Corticotrophin releasing hormone, the corticotrophin releasing hormone acting here, thyroid releasing hormone acting here, antidiuretic hormone, which is ADH, it is acting, I will tell you later where ADH is acting. ADH is acting in another A. Then you have the oxytocin, which is time dependent. Okay. Now, antidiuretic hormone actually acting on the posterior, the other side of the pituitary. Okay. We'll come later into that. Then you have the parathyroid, which is secreting parathyroid hormones, and you see these color codes. These color codes are important because the green ones are showing the polypeptides, the magenta is showing the amino acid derivative, and orange one is showing the steroids. Okay. Then you have the thyroid, which is an amino acid derivative, which is secreting thyroxine. Then in the kidney you have the adrenal, which is secreting epinephrine, and two steroid hormones, which is cortisol and aldosterone, and kidney, which is secreting erythropoietin, which increases your red blood cell production, and vitamin D by the kidney, which decreases the blood calcium. Similarly, you have the pancreas, which is Islet of Langerhans cells secreting the insulin, which decreases blood glucose, glucagon, which increases the blood glucose. Ovaries in females secrete estradiol, regulates the development and maintenance of secondary sex characteristics in female and other effects. Then you have progesterone, which prepares the uterus for pregnancy. These are two unique stuff in the female body, whereas in the male body you have the testes, which regulates the development and maintenance of secondary sex characteristics in male and other effects. We will come to that later. So, now from here we will move on to the characteristic of these three, and if you look at the characteristics of these three, this is how it looks like. These are the polypeptides, long polypeptide chains, as you could see. They bind to the receptor and then the cascade of event takes place. These are not lipid soluble, bind to receptor on the surface of the target cell, whereas the amino acids exactly the same mechanism, they go and bind. These are very small molecules, they go and bind to the surface. Most non-lipid soluble bind to receptor and surface of the target cell. Then comes the steroid. These ones goes through and through. Lipid soluble binds to receptor inside the target cells, and all these are happening outside the target cell. So, this is the modus operandi by which it works. Now, overall function of the endocrine system includes reproduction, response to stress and injury, growth and sexual development, body energy level, internal balance of the body segments, and bone and muscle strength. Here you have the hypothalamus pituitary axis. So, this is where this is your pituitary, where it is sitting, and this is where your hypothalamus is sitting, and it is the hypothalamus pituitary axis, which regulates most of the endocrine system of our body. Okay. This is how really the axis looks like. So, this is your posterior pituitary. So, posterior pituitary and anterior pituitary has this difference, that posterior pituitary is directly connected by the nervous system. This is the direct connectivity to the posterior pituitary, if you follow this. Okay. So, it does not depend on any kind of transmission of the molecules via blood. Okay. So, here you have the hypothalamus. So, this is the hypothalamus producing, releasing hormones and inhibiting hormone that directly influence the anterior pituitary hormone secretion. Okay. Hypothalamus produces two hormones, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, that are stored in the posterior pituitary. So, this is I was telling you that these two, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, we go back to that master sheet, you will realize it. Here it is, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, these are directly going to posterior pituitary. Okay. Now, coming back, then hypothalamus oversees the autonomic nervous system, which is ANS, where you have epinephrine, norepinephrine, all those stuff secretion happens, thereby helping to stimulate the adrenal medulla via sympathetic innervation. So, this adrenal medulla we are talking about on top of the, you remember on the top of the kidney there is this organ, adrenal medulla. Just to follow up on it, this is where the adrenal is sitting. Okay. So, just think of it, this is the kind of control level we are talking about, this is the kind of distance these molecules follow. So, coming back, so hypothalamus oversees the ANS, thereby helping to stimulate the adrenal medulla via sympathetic innervation, which is part of the autonomic nervous system. So, this is where it is, sympathetic preganglionic axon, they are forming synapses on the, so this is basically a neuroendocrine axis. This is that neuroendocrine axis we are talking about. Here you have the adrenal gland, you have the adrenal medulla, this is adrenal cortex, and the secretion of epinephrine and norepinephrine happening from these adrenal medulla is regulated by the neuroendocrine axis. So, this is how much of this chart works, and out here you have the anterior pituitary, where the signaling from hypothalamus to anterior pituitary happens via blood vessels instead of, or unlike posterior pituitary, where there are direct innervation. So, on a much more broader scale, this is how it looks like. If you look at it, there is a direct contact, neurons of the supraoptic and periventricular nuclei directly innervating into the posterior pituitary, whereas out here if you look at it, this is how the secretion is taken. Neurons of the dorsal medial, ventral medial and infundibular nuclei, they are secreting to the blood vessels, and these blood vessels are bringing the signals to the anterior pituitary. Whereas in the posterior pituitary, you see there is a direct connection of the nervous system onto the posterior pituitary, which is also called the pars nervosa, because this posterior pituitary is also considered as part of the nervous system. So, this is the fundamental difference you should keep in mind. So, this is the stem of the hypothalamus pituitary axis, this is the median eminence of that structure, and these are the primary capillaries of the plexus. Okay. And these are the endocrine cells of anterior pituitary. AP stands for anterior pituitary. Hormones produced in the hypothalamus and released in the pars nervosa. So, all these hormones are marked like this, which is the direct contact stimulating or inhibiting hormone produced in the hypothalamus, shown in different colors, and the hormones produced in the pars distalis. Pars distalis out here is, that means this is anterior pituitary. Now, moving on to the next slide. Here is our next slide, where we are talking about hypothalamus, and this is the direct connection to posterior pituitary, where it is secreting ADH and oxytocin. These hormones move down the axon to axon terminals. When appropriate, ADH and oxytocin are secreted from the axon terminal into the bloodstream. Okay. Whereas, if you look out here, neurosecretory cells produce hypothalamic releasing and hypothalamic inhibiting hormones. This is for the anterior pituitary, and these hormones are secreted in the portal systems. Here you have the portal system sitting. Each type of hypothalamic hormone either stimulates or inhibits production and secretion of anterior pituitary hormones. Okay. And the anterior pituitary secretes its hormone into the bloodstream, which delivers them to the specific tissues, which includes, if you look at the posterior pituitary, it increases ADH secretion, antidiuretic hormone, smooth muscle contraction in the uterus through oxytocin, and the mammary gland development by the oxytocin. So, these are the three things where this is involved, whereas anterior pituitary, it secretes prolactin, which acts on the mammary gland for the production of milk. Then this influences the thyroid stimulating hormone, which is involved in secretion of thyroxine, which is involved in bone tissue and other things. Then you have adrenal cortex, ACTH, which is secreted by the adrenal cortex. Then you have the ovaries and testes, which are secreting gonadotropin releasing hormone, and all these are being controlled by anterior pituitary at multiple levels of control. Okay. So, now next I will be moving, I will close in here, and then next I will be moving on to the thyroid. Okay, thyroid stimulating hormones. So, thyroid is the next major system which is involved in it. So, major source of for the thyroid synthesis, you need iodine. Why you need iodine? If you look at the structure of the thyroid, it exists, it has these iodine molecules. So, this is the tyrosine amino acid, from where the thyroxine T4 or T3 is being formed, and this is the inactive form. If you compare these two structure, inactive T3 and active T3. Okay. So, it exists in three different molecules, and this is the recombinant one, RT3. So, thyroid control is hypothalamus, secreting thyroid releasing hormone, activates the anterior pituitary, which secretes thyroid stimulating hormone, that tells the thyroid gland to secrete T4 and T3, and the target tissue iodinase enzyme remove the iodine, and it makes T4 convert T4 to T3, and that T3 is the one which is acting on the target tissue. And there are negative feedback loops where there are excess of T3, then T3 negative feedback loop tells anterior pituitary not to secrete any further T4. Okay. So, this is how the axis looks like: hypothalamus, pituitary, thyrotrophin, and here is the thyroid gland, and it is influencing your kidney, liver, heart and muscle, and hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid axis. This is that critical axis which governs many of our processes, and this is how much of the transporters of these kind of thyroxine, triiodothyronine molecules takes place, and these are sufficient dietary iodine when thyroid formation is perfectly fine, but in case of insufficient thyroid, you see disease like goiter or hypertrophy of the thyroid gland. And thyroid dysfunction, the hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism, in both cases there are series of symptoms which are there, and I wish you people to read through it. Okay, we will close in here. In the next class, we will talk about the adrenal and all other rest of the endocrine system. Thank you.